Hi, I'm Anna, and I haven't done a video in a while, but I'll say I'm one of the cores of Collective Mind, I guess, is this intro. I am and have been a lot of different things throughout the years. I was our first long-term host, and I am still a social alter like I've been for a long time. But I mainly do caretaking and spiritual protecting currently. We wanted to make a video about this because the term core in the system community has a lot of controversy around it, and it is used in several different types of ways, and I think it's important to understand that different systems are using the term in different ways, similarly to how other terms like protector and stuff like that even can mean at least slightly different things to different systems. Some of the ways that some systems use the term core will feel invalidating or even offensive to some other systems. That doesn't always necessarily mean it's an inaccurate way to use the term, because different systems work differently, so that could be accurate for them, but not accurate for other systems. It's just going to depend. Some of it is also about your personal perspective, and isn't necessarily about what's true or not true. And most uses that we've seen are at least not entirely misinformation or completely incorrect. There are at least ways to see it that way that wouldn't contradict the scientific understanding of how systems work, essentially. So generally speaking, use the terms that you're comfortable with, and when you're talking about someone else's system, use the terms that they are comfortable with for their system. When you know what those are, of course. One of the common ways that we see people use the term is interchangeable with the idea of an original alter, which generally, according to the idea of structural dissociation, there wouldn't be one original alter, because structural dissociation is essentially it's the prevalent theory currently on how systems form in childhood, and the short version is essentially that you are never one identity if you are a system, because all children start out with separate ego states, and systems just don't ever fully integrate them. Or if they do eventually, like in final fusion, it's much, much later than in normal development. And because of that idea, there wouldn't be one true original who then split into a bunch of parts. And even if there were, once that original person split into a bunch of parts, all of those would be parts of the original. One of them wouldn't be the original. So to have the idea of one true original, you would need to think of it as the brain splitting separately from that original person splitting, which feels a little complicated to me, but you would also have to be talking outside of the theory of structural dissociation. That being said, having several cores using the definition essentially of original would make sense within structural dissociation. You could have a few alters who were the originals, and then you've had new splits since then. That would be an understanding that would make sense with that theory. But another way that we've thought about it before is, let's say there's a system who had 4 originals, a host, and 3 others, essentially. But let's say the host has never split, but all of those other 3 originals have split many times over by the time they know about their system, essentially. You could make an argument that the host is still a core and the other alters aren't anymore because they've split so much. They aren't still the person they were when they were one of the originals, if that makes sense. Or there could even be a perspective of if one or a few alters have the most memories, especially of childhood, and especially if it's much more than others, you could decide you want to distinguish that as them being a core. This also fits partly into the next category of the core or cores being more real in some way, which, whether or not alters are real generally is something we are also planning to make a video about soon, but the short answer is that alters are real and we form identities and personalities in the same way as any singlet does with our individual experiences, which is why we are different from each other. We have separate experiences that shape us differently. But that being said, if some alters have many more experiences than others, they could end up having kind of a more fully formed identity and personality because they've had more experiences. This can be what differentiates alters from fragments, for instance. But another example of that is the type of OSDD, I think it's 1A, where other alters are less distinct, essentially, where it's different versions of the host or things like that. That could make sense then to call that host a core, because the host has a more fleshed out personality and identity, essentially. But again, it's a situation where it's if it's a useful distinction for your system to say this alter or this group of alters are clearly distinct in this way and this term is useful to distinguish them, that can make sense for a lot of systems to do that. There's also a more kind of vague idea of if there is an alter who's just kind of central in some way to how the system functions. A lot of systems don't work like this. They don't revolve around one alter, but some do. Some do choose to make decisions based around one alter. I think this is probably more likely in systems who are working toward final fusion, I would imagine, because they would not, they'd be less likely to be working toward their individual goals, separate from each other. They'd be working toward common goals, and I think it could make sense in some cases to be working toward specifically the host's goals, in which case thinking of them as the core and then thinking of fusing the other alters back into the core could be a helpful perspective for them. How we use the term generally is to describe 4 of our subsystems, which we've talked about before in one of our videos about subsystems and probably a couple other points in various videos. But we have 4 core subsystems that split from the 4 originals that we know of. And the alters in those subsystems still have a lot of the memories related to being those 4 original people. So I am the host of the elemental core subsystem, and my subsystem in childhood didn't exist, but my subsystem is made up of the pieces of who I essentially used to be in childhood as our main host originally. but I split a bunch into a subsystem, so I kind of consider myself a core, but I'm almost like the core of the core subsystem, of like my core subsystem. But that's like nitpicky, it could go either way. But I'm like the face of the subsystem in a lot of ways, and I'm the most similar by far, I would say, to who my subsystem was before it split. Basically, I have the same name, I have a lot of similar qualities. So it's possible that there were other original alters that we don't know of who either split a lot more or just haven't shared any information with the rest of us or anything like that. But generally speaking, we consider those four subsystems to be our core subsystems, and it's my subsystem, Aura's subsystem, Jade's subsystem, and Rachel's, who Rachel has not been on this channel at all, and I don't think anyone from her subsystem has. I think it'll probably stay that way, at least for a while, but who knows? I think some of the controversy that has existed around the term is that some of the clinical usage of the term has been used to invalidate other alters who are not whoever they choose to call the core. In a lot of cases, I would expect the host. And I expect it is still to some extent, and has often in the past been used to push final fusion on systems who may not have wanted it, and likely in a lot of cases weren't ready for it yet, even if they would have eventually wanted it. Which is a problem in like the mental health community that is still in the process of being updated essentially with new research. So newer research is pushing the idea of a core less, I think, for those reasons, and because in some cases I think it was oversimplifying what systems can actually look like. One very easy example is a lot of systems, including ours, change host over time, and that can pretty easily confuse the idea of a core if you're associating it with whoever the main host is, because that can change, and for some systems that changes a lot. But it also, I think, confuses a lot of people who will think that like the core isn't an alter and is the only real one, or the core can't split or can't go dormant, or things like that, which just aren't true. So I think there are ways to use the term that can be helpful. I think forcing the term on people who are uncomfortable with it, like with most things, is not helpful, especially because there isn't really a clear like definition of it currently. There isn't one way that people are using it, and the ways historically that it has been used clinically are the ones that have the most issues, I would say. So the most consensus that there is would be in the research that is becoming outdated and is oversimplified and has been used to cause harm. So I think it's one of those terms that can help some people and can hurt some people, and that's okay as long as neither of those groups are forcing their position on the other group, essentially. Because we've seen that go both directions. And one of the takes that we've seen the most often, especially because we use the term, and we, for a while, I don't remember if we still do, had the term visible as part of the display names for a lot of us who are in one of those core subsystems on Discord. So we would be talking in various system servers, and people would try to correct us about the word core and using it in a system context. And then we would say, like, they would try to tell us about structural dissociation, which we already knew about, to correct us about using the term core. And then we would respond with, depending on how harsh they were, either we had 4 cores and now we have 4 core subsystems, or just say, like, that's not how we use the term, or say that's the name of our subsystems, which is also true. Because that's the other thing, that, like, you don't know how someone's using the term, and the word core outside of a system context has a lot of other meanings. So someone using it even in a system context could be using it in all kinds of other ways, like a central point in their inner world, or an apple core. Like, I think there's a lot of pushback, there's a lot of unnecessary pushback against the word, and using the word itself doesn't mean a lot of the things that people assume when they see the word. And I think it's probably triggering for some people because it's associated with some harmful ideologies, but a lot of people who use it don't use it that way. So I think it's helpful to keep that in mind and to have those conversations instead of just throwing accusations immediately. So those are our thoughts on it, but we would love to hear your thoughts if you have any, assuming they are kind and respectful. Thank you as always for watching the video. If you liked it, I hope you'll click the like button and make sure that you're subscribed so that you can see all of our future videos. We'll put other recommended videos and things on the screen as well, and in the description box we have a lot of links, such as our Patreon, our wish list, our Discord, our Etsy shop, all kinds of things. And one of the pretty new things we're starting to do is, if we get items sent to us from our wish list, we are doing little unboxing clips of those on our Patreon, but making them publicly available so you don't have to sign up as a patron to see them. You can see them for free. So if that sounds interesting to you, again, that link is, both of those links are in our description box. And what else is there? I think that's it. So thank you for watching. Bye.